And U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's visit to Saudi Arabia seems that it wasn't as fruitful for Washington because Saudi, it's now cozying up to China to strengthen bilateral and economic ties.
Absolutely. Now, this comes just days after Blinken's visit to Riyadh stabilizes the strained relations between Washington and Riyadh. Now, Saudi Arabia's diplomatic relations with the United States previously went through a rough patch. That is when the U.S. intelligence claimed that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman approved the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, a fierce critic of his government.
Right. At the Saudi-China Business Conference on Sunday, Saudi Ministry of Energy Prince Abdulaziz expressed that Riyadh will go wherever there is a business opportunity. Earlier in March, Saudi state oil giant Saudi Aramco signed 2 major deals with China, and this raised multi-billion-dollar investment and became China's biggest provider of crude oil.
At the Sunday's conference, Saudi Finance Minister said that China is Arab world's largest trade partner. The volume of trade exchange between Riyadh and Beijing had reached a record $106 billion in 2022.
Last year, Chinese President Xi Jinping had also expressed his desire to purchase oil from Saudi in Chinese yuan, a move that could weaken the US dollar's global dominance in the long run.
Saudi hopes that in the coming years, Chinese investors will explore and find more opportunities for further investments in the Arab world.
Now, the hope is also, Ayesha, to ratify the free trade deal between China and Saudi Arabia that's been ongoing since 2004.
Absolutely. And to talk more on this, we're now being joined by retired Colonel Rich Utsin. He is a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council in Turkey and a geopolitical analyst. Thank you so much for joining us from WION, Professor. Now,
good to be with you.
Now, Saudi Arabia says that it does not want to compete with China, but rather collaborate with China. Do you see this as a rise of China ties in the Gulf region?
Well, I don't think this is so much about China as it is about the nature of the international system and the regional system in the Middle East. The reality of multipolarity is that everyone needs to deal with everyone. We're not dealing with the Cold War paradigm anymore, where it's the U.S. against the Soviet Union, or even the post-Cold War paradigm of the last 20 years, in which it's the U.S. against the axis of evil. The truth is that we have multiple partners and multiple competitors in every region of the world, in East Asia and South Asia, and in the Middle East as well. So when President Biden came in saying that Mohammed bin Salman, Saudi Arabia, was a pariah, and that we were going to use unilateral power to marginalize him and change his behavior, this was sort of an echo of the previous era in which the United States had unilateral power and the ability to just sort of peremptorily say that a country should do X or Y. That's not the world we're in right now. The world we're in is very competitive. It's multi-axial. Saudi Arabia is a premium case of this, in which not just this year, but even last year, when they were ignoring Biden's requests to increase oil production to meet U.S. price and targets, and they said, no, we're not going to do that. So we saw again with the Iran-Saudi reconciliation or rapprochement that was brokered by Beijing, and now this latest meeting in which the Saudi officials say, yes, we're not taking sides in this. A perfect example of the fact that Saudi Arabia, like many countries in the region, has adapted to multipolarity. The question is whether the United States has or not.
Right, Colonel Adson, thank you so much for that. Now, just on that note, for better clarity, in March, Saudi Aramco announced 2 major deals to raise its multi-billion-dollar investment in China. Now, with growing Saudi Arabia and China ties, how do you think that this is being viewed in Washington?
Well, I think Washington is very internally focused right now. We are a year and a couple of months out from a major election internally. So the fact that any of our international partners does X or Y is not attracting that much attention, to be honest with you. I think in general, there's a perception in Washington that the Biden administration is misplayed. Saudi Arabia, and certainly on the Republican side of the aisle, and in full transparency, I come from the conservative side of the political spectrum in the U.S. There's this idea that by being very preachy, being very preachy early in the administration, that the Biden team sort of missed some opportunities with Saudi Arabia, and yet it's still a competitive game. So I would say that it's not a view that Saudi Arabia has flipped somehow and has become a pro-China country. It's just the idea that, look, we have to compete when it comes to energy, when it comes to security, when it comes to geopolitical rivalry. The United States needs to do a better job of convincing countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and Turkey that we are their friends and that we have more to offer than China or Russia. And right now, that's really not the case. Right now, it seems like a confused message from Washington.
Right, Colonel. We'll, of course, be tracking the shifting equations in the West Asia. But thank you so much for joining us on WION and sharing your insights with us on this. Thanks very much.
Good to see you.